Welcome, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Arjen Naafs from IWRM WASH, and I'm very happy to be able to welcome you to a webinar on IWRM and WASH under the Wetlands banner. And for this hour, we'll be discussing the linkages between IWRM and WASH. We'll be having a presentation from Arjen, who's leading it within the Watershed consortium, and we will be having a colleague from Kenya presenting as well, if everything goes as scheduled and planned. There will be space for discussion as well, and we very much hope that it will be an inspiration. Before I ask Arjen to get started, I would like to request in the chat box, please, to put your name and the organization where you're from, so we have an idea of who is online. Otherwise, I would request you to keep your camera off and your microphone muted, just to make sure that we can continue until the discussion part. And then please do feel free to unmute at that time. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as well at any time, so that and we'll come back to those questions towards the end. So we have ACFO colleagues online, Veerle, we have Mavi colleagues online, Paul, and also the people I know from IRC, they're still typing. Great, we have Patrick as well, Ruchika. So thank you very much. We can see a whole host of our consortium colleagues online, and that's really great. We've all been working on Watershed for a while, and IWRM WASH has always been one of the components of it. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Arjen, who will be presenting some of the processes and results where we are now. Arjen, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Arjen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Arjen Saaf. I am here on behalf of Wetlands International. Many of you know me or have met me either in India or in Mali or in the Netherlands. Many of you I have not met, but I hope all your families and loved ones are fine within the context of this this virus that we're all suffering under. So I hope this 1 hour will sort of take us all out of our daily worries and give us some interesting insights that we can take forward to our partners and our organizations and the people that we work for. I'm going to present briefly our work on the IWRM and WASH linkages. As a start to that, I do hope that at the end of this webinar, you will all have a feeling that you've got a clearer understanding of how to move forward on your lobby and advocacy work on these linkages, because that's the whole objective of this webinar. I think we've achieved a lot. Everybody's made a lot of progress, and this should bring all of this together and let it all make more sense than before. So I have prepared a brief timeline with the support of my colleagues, of course. Where have we been and where are we headed in terms of this topic, IWRM WASH? Now, on this timeline, I was not able to place all of the activities and documents and work done by all the partners, but I need to mention, of course, the work done by Bangladesh and by India and by Kenya and many of the other countries in terms of publications, in terms of activities. And we will also be hearing from Kenya as an illustration of some of these activities. But when the program started in May 2016, Wetlands International developed a document which was authored by Frank van Weert to try to come to terms with the complexity of trying to, at that time, integrate IWRM and WASH as concepts. That document was then followed by a document by Joyce Kortlandt, more focused on the alignment of these issues in Dutch foreign policies. These were both very useful and very important documents that laid the foundation for our thinking on this issue. And then in January 2019, terms of reference were developed to take this forward with a number of workshops. And at this time, Arjen Naafs came on board, and I joined in October 2019. So my work rests on the shoulders of many others, just to make sure that that is well understood. Workshops were held with my predecessor, Niels van den Bergen, in Bangladesh in June 2019. So Niels and Arjen went to Kenya in July 2019. And then most of us met in India in August 2019, and then more workshops followed in Ghana, Uganda, and then finally in Mali in November 2019. So a lot of the discussions, topics, and thinking have led us to what we now have, which is a position paper on IWRM WASH, which is almost ready, and which we will all share with you after this webinar. But so this is the timeline of this process so far. So we developed some knowledge products. It was quite a challenge to come up with knowledge products that were really practical and useful. We didn't want to go back into developing very lengthy documents. So we considered the issue of the lobby and advocacy worker in the field and how he or she would address this issue in terms of addressing their constituents, the local government. So we developed a manual, first in French and now also in English, for field level lobby and advocacy workers on this issue of IWRM WASH linkages. And the position paper, which I also presented in the previous slide quickly as a result of all the work that everybody has been involved in. So why is linking IWRM and WASH important? Well, they are inherently intertwined. And that's something that we all know from the beginning. We've had the sense of this for quite some time. But how we actually translate this to interventions on the ground and messages that we bring across to other people in terms of lobby and advocacy was not so easy. But there's two examples here on the slide. One of them, how fecal sludge from latrines can pollute water sources for other users. This can be the case either on a river where downstream users are affected, or at a shallow aquifer where latrines drain into shallow aquifers. Another example is groundwater extraction for irrigation that may impact drinking water availability. This is also the case in some of the areas that we work in. In both cases, this is where we see where water resources management and WASH clearly come together, and where it's important to make sure that we take both into account and that we don't just live in our silos of, okay, we're doing WASH, we don't worry about the other side, and the other guys are like, well, they're doing drinking water, we can worry about our own issue. So too little alignment between the two. Actually, it says here on the slide currently, but I must say, I do see quite a shift even in the past few months in terms of thinking and policy in the international work that we do, not only in the Watershed program. There is little alignment, but there are developments that are moving in that direction. So there's a need for integrated approaches aimed at long-term resilient water services, and that's what we have developed. So first question, what are these links? What I'd like to clarify here, for some of you who have been involved for some time, we used to talk about the integration of IWRM or WRM and WASH. Now, I would like to suggest that we do not use the word integration anymore from this point forward, because the concepts are both conceptually and institutionally not comparable and very difficult to integrate as one. So we talk about the links between the two. We talk about where water resources management touches upon WASH, and we will have some illustrations of that in a minute. So two key questions that clarify these linkages is, where is WASH under threat due to problematic water resource management? For example, polluted water that is made available to the WASH system but cannot be used? Or where and how is problematic WASH, in brackets the sanitation, a threat to other water resources and ecosystems? This is also the other side of the same process, whereby the water source is polluted after use. Just to place this in context, we have links to the SDGs. Water use and scarcity and water resources management are both very important elements that can threaten and affect drinking water availability. This is fairly straightforward, but it's quite important to see how our processes and our activities are all linked together, what we are working towards. At the same time, sanitation and hygiene can affect water resources management, mainly the water quality and also the water quantity. So it brings in scarcity, and it can affect the pollution of the aquifers or surface water. So all of these elements are clearly linked in the SDGs that we are working for and with. So try to capture this in a schematic illustration diagram. We've come up initially with this, where you've got the water flow, whether it's a river or whether it's groundwater, and water is captured to the right for drinking water. So the water quality needs to be of the sufficient quality to be able to serve as drinking water or to be easily treated to a level that it can be used for drinking water. And it needs to be of the right quantity. Now, these issues of quality and quantity are water resource management issues. So you can see the linkage right away there between IWRM and WASH. Then the process flows through, and then we see the water being polluted through sanitation. Usually between 60 to 80% of water provided in the scheme goes back to the ecosystem as wastewater. And this polluted water, whether through fecal matter or possibly through grey water, goes back into the ecosystem and often back into the same resource from which it was taken. And it affects either downstream users or even ourselves again. So the linkages between IWRM and WASH again are at the beginning and at the end of the WASH process. I can imagine many of you have questions, and I'll be very happy to answer these later on in the webinar, but we're almost finished with this presentation to give you some visuals. Here it is again, and we've changed the heading because there's a link to climate change and water scarcity. In many cases, rain periodicity is changing, more or less, more concentrated, or just no more. So it clearly affects not only the quantity, but also the quality available. And again, we have the link between water resources on the one hand, and also backflowing into the resource on the other hand. If the sanitation is not done properly and the water resource is scarce, the pollution levels are ever so much higher. So again, those are the two elements, 2 points where IWRM and WASH come together. Some more examples of linkages, and you will see at the bottom also some of the illustrations that we have used and prepared for the manual done by Veerle van Loevestein of ACVO. I encourage you all by the time that we've had the webinar to have a look at the manuals which we will make available. They're, I think, very useful and also very nicely done. So an example of these linkages are to take into consideration the proximity of latrines to the water source. Again, possible pollution of the water source from latrines. And as possible solutions, either consider moving the latrine to another location, or can water be used more efficiently or effectively in a different manner to address this pollution issue. So next steps in this process is, in terms of lobby and advocacy, try to agree with government officials on a set of steps to resolve the problems identified. Now, this is easier said than done. And it's, of course, not only government officials, it's also with users, it's user groups. And this is also an issue that we have addressed in the manual, where we have developed a small checklist to agree on some of these next steps and also to monitor the progress of these next steps. As I said, there are more examples in the manual, which will be made available soon after the webinar, together with the position paper. An important note: encouraging linkages between IWRM and WASH and bringing these messages across does not mean that everybody at field level needs to understand IWRM in full detail, because that would complicate the issue to the point where people would not know what to say and to do, because it's a very technical subject. So the message here is to you, encouraging linkages does not mean that civil society organizations implementing WASH need to be fully capacitated in IWRM. And the second important note here is that experts implementing WASH are not responsible for IWRM. In other words, just because we are now looking at these linkages between IWRM and WASH does not mean that the WASH parties suddenly become responsible for water resources management. This remains a responsibility of the relevant organizations and authorities. There is cooperation, there are messages being shared, there is awareness of the linkages, but there's not a shift of responsibilities. So this was the presentation that I wanted to share with you. I think we're nicely on time for that. Arjen, I hope that Lilian has come online to give her presentation on the case study in Kenya.
Yes, she is online. Thank you very much, Lilian, for coming online as well. Is there any urgent question that anybody has at this point? Before we continue to Lilian? We've got one from Martin at the moment. But it's not, okay. Then let's go over to Lilian. Lilian, can you please unmute, and I will share my screen with the presentation, and then you can go ahead and present. Over to you, Lilian.
Thank you very much, Arjen and Arjen. This presentation is supposed to be done by myself and Jacob. He is running a little bit late, so I will proceed. We will share our experiences from implementing the Watershed program in Kajiado County, more specifically in terms of how we have been strengthening these linkages between WASH and WRM. Next. So as Kajiado County, is one of the areas where we work in. It is a rapidly urbanizing town, and the issues, linkages in terms of WRM WASH integration that Arjen presented are actually present in this county that we work in. There's a lot of issues to do with pollution from livestock. There's a lot of pollution from agriculture, domestic use. There's a lot of, there's poor sanitation, there's poor sewage facilities within this county, and the water sources are actually not able to meet the demand. The supply cannot meet the demand within the county. Next, please. So when we began the program, we had this context analysis done. We wanted to know, so why is this an issue in Kajiado County? And one of the key areas that we identified was that there was sectoral thinking. So everyone was working in silos, as has been mentioned before. So the concept of counties decentralization was quite new in Kenya. And they're still setting up the counties and the systems and structures that would be able to operationalize the different sectors within the counties. So as this was happening, there was still a lot of sectoral thinking, issues to do with energy, agriculture, water and sanitation were still working in their own silos. No one was talking to, people are not talking to each other, basically. And so a lot was going wrong in terms of WRM and WASH. Next, please. So one of the things that we saw that we can capitalize on the linkages, we are still changing from integration, now linkages, is the use of what we call multi-stakeholder platforms on WRM and WASH. So bringing people together to start having these conversations. What is happening? What is going on wrong? What is what are people doing within their own sectors, what is happening in terms of financing for water resources, financing for sanitation, who is being involved in these decisions, are the local communities being involved, is it gender sensitive, issues to do with environment actually being taken into consideration. So we decided to set up a platform, a multi-stakeholder platform. We call the Kajiado County WASH and WASH Forum, which is a structured mechanism for water and related sector institutions to synergize, to start complementary, to have inclusive decision making amongst themselves. And so this we did early last year, and has been going on up to date. Next, please. So what this platform does is that it provides for intersectoral coordination. The people from the water sector bring this understanding based on the research that has been done, that has been conducted, research that we're doing, the threats within the WRM sector and the for WASH services are being brought to the fore. So we begin to have this recognition of the importance of the linkages between WRM and WASH. So this is the first thing or the entry point for us. So for people within these sectors to have this understanding. After they have this understanding, what we facilitate is next is a joint identification of gaps or challenges. And for this is something that we have seen to be very important is if it is done jointly, then there's some bit of ownership and people began allocating resources in terms of staff capacity, in terms of financial resources to address these challenges. And it has been happening in Kajiado very well. One instance is after we had a WRM WASH training where we brought the Kajiado County staff that was facilitated by Arjen sometime last year. And these issues started being discussed. And one of the people from the environment sector said that they didn't actually quite understand that this was happening. And immediately after, they lobbied for resources to be allocated in terms of waste, to set up a waste dumping site area for the county. And this is one of the key things that we can say has been a key achievement directly from one of these trainings that we've had. And then after the identification of these gaps or challenges, then they prioritize interventions for implementation. And for this, we say, if we are part of these discussions in terms of financing, discussions in terms of developing these sector plans or county plans, then we have a foot inside and we are able to influence these interventions. Are they in line with the priorities? Are they linked to the key issues that we're discussing? Next, please. So basically some of the key achievements, or maybe I forgot to mention that these representatives from the county for this forum are drawn from citizen groups across the county, and everyone has a representative within this forum, and they help raising the specific issues within this forum. So some of the achievements so far we've had is that we've enhanced coordination amongst these forums and the interventions that they are actually overseeing. This has happened for the first time in the county. It was not there. Then secondly is that these forums have been used as platforms for information sharing and learning by the community representatives and by the WASH partners. So information sharing, what is happening in the sector, what are the new innovations, what are the funding opportunities. So this is one such platform for the forums. And also one important thing as well is that these forum representatives, based on their visibility, they were identified as budget champions. that were working on lobbying and advocating for budgetary allocations in the budgets. And one key thing that they did is they prepared submissions for consideration for next year's, to develop next year's annual development plan. So this is one of the key things that have happened that we see are a direct result of the forum. Despite this, next please, despite this, there have been challenges. One of the things that we see is that we have been at the forefront leading and facilitating these forums, this platform, but we need ownership. So it is more or less seen as a watershed platform. And we want it to be seen as a county forum, not a watershed, not us owning the forum per se, but the county themselves. So after watershed ends, what will happen to this forum? Does it mean that it will die? So one of the things that we have begun looking at this year quite closely is the issue of sustainability of this forum, to encourage the county to convene these forums directly in terms of facilitating people to attend these meetings where necessary, and also ensuring that the monitoring mechanisms are available. So several resolutions have been brought up as a result of these forums. But one of the things that, to be honest, we have not been good at is following up and monitoring. So very important, very nice things come up, but we do not necessarily follow up, either because we do not have the funds or the budget to do so, we do not have the capacity to do so, but we're now trying to be more proactive in terms of how do we do this follow-up and monitoring. Next, please. So in terms of recommendations, we see that the key actors should maintain accountability, transparency, and consider inclusive decision-making and participation. This is because sometimes we have this, well, we should call maybe elite capture. So the people who attend, they keep this information to themselves. They want to sort of just be the owners of this information. So it's one of the things that we want to promote and to that we recommend to the county to do. Secondly, is that we need to have clear roles and responsibilities of the actors in this subsector. Because sometimes there is conflicting roles, and if everyone is doing, then no one is doing it. So we are lobbying for review of some of these policies so that some of these roles are very clear at the county level. And then thirdly, we want to develop a mechanism to continuously review, monitor, and evaluate the forum, basically have a feedback loop, and ensure that we act on the feedback that we get from this forum. And then another thing is to plan for regular meetings with a clear agenda and apply effective communication to key stakeholders. So this is something that we have been doing very well. Our meetings, we communicate through the county government, who calls the other stakeholders. We ensure that we are open in terms of who we include into the sector. We did a brief gender analysis to identify where are they, how are they affected, and how do we include them into these forums. And most importantly is that we focused on the realities on the ground and looked at building a space for listening and dialogue for people who have been excluded for quite a while within the county. And lastly, for us, you see that also linked to monitoring and evaluation is the need for clear information mining from each constituency represented and report back mechanisms. Different people are different. Some may not be as vocal as others. So we need a mechanism to ensure that deliberations and representations are actually captured in a way that is representative of what is happening within these forums. Next. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lillian. That was a wonderful presentation with some really interesting information. I would like to ask if anybody has questions or thoughts. Either put them in the chat as we are going along, or feel free to unmute and introduce yourself and say what you want to say. I'll start with Martin, who put a question in for that it's not just about sanitation, but also about grey water. Martin, can I ask you do you want to elaborate on that? Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Rian, and all those who have presented. I was just saying that it's not about that the sanitation, we need to probably expand the view beyond fecal contamination, but also other activities that you produce, like grey water, like washing alongside the river banks, that also end up where WASH in particular hurts the water resources. So I was just expanding that we need to take our views beyond only maybe a latrine near a water resource, but also other human activities that result into contamination of water resources.
Indeed, it is. It's one of the things, how is WASH as a wider thing influencing the water resources in the area? Thank you very much, Martin, for the contribution. Paul, I can see you have some thoughts about Cajado. Could you indicate a little bit how that's going and if there's already anything coming out of that? Over to you, Paul.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, I was in Cajado County, where we prepared 4 different poll questions for the upcoming radio campaign. We did a similar campaign last year in Uganda, and Stephen from our partner Hewasa had presented it during the partnership meeting in India, this kind of approach. So what we're going to do is like a poll question is going to be broadcasted live on radio, and it will run for a week. And then listeners to the radio station can reply by it by text messages. So these are like multiple choice answers, and then people can reply on what they think. So it's about like getting effective feedback from the listeners, which we then later can use for further lobby and advocacy. So we have like one kickoff radio show, and then afterwards we have identified 4 different questions. So after every question, we have another radio show. And I would like to see back like the recommendation that were just given, like how can we include those things during those radio shows? Because that will be very interesting to make the linkage between today's presentation and what we're about to start in Kenya. And actually something similar we're going to do in Uganda, because last week I was in Uganda to prepare the second campaign, and there we're going to run 6 different questions over a period of 3 months, and with 7 live radio shows. So that's just
fantastic. Thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful example of how it straight away goes into advocacy, as well as empowering communities to be able to speak out and to give their input into policies and increasing the knowledge. Thank you very much. I'm just going to hand over to Elian. I think you've been able to see some of the comments as well. Elian, can I hand it back over to you?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Arjen, and thank you, everybody. I actually put a small side comment on the grey water. In some cases where water may be more scarce, grey water does offer a very interesting opportunity for reuse through very simple treatment processes, where you can actually not either reuse it or recharge it back to the aquifer. There are some projects that we visited that I know about that have done this. Even in Bangladesh, this is done with rainwater. There's a lot of things that we can work with there that make it very useful to emphasize these linkages to the various parties at field level. I particularly like the work that was done in Kenya with the forum, and I think it offers a lot of opportunities. One thing that I would like to suggest to the Kenya team is that for these kinds of fora to be sustainable, the issue of their legitimacy and their relevance is extremely key for retaining them. So that's something that I would be very happy to help them with after the webinar to think about. In the meantime, what's really important to me for this webinar is to see whether there's anybody that is listening that is maybe not 100% clear on the way that we define these linkages, or is concerned that we may have overlooked anything. We've already touched upon the greywater issue, but please speak up now, because I really want to try to help you understand this, so that when we move forward with this work, even in possibly a Watershed 2.0, but also in your other work, that we understand that these are the linkages and this is how it's translated into practical examples and so on and so forth. So please, anybody out there who wants to ask any more questions on that right now? No. I see that I don't see any questions in the chat box, nor do I hear anybody. So
Eliam, this is Patrick, and
hey, hi Patrick.
Hey, how you doing? My apologies, because it may just be that I was slightly multitasking during this very nice webinar. So apologies if I'm asking something that's there already. But to what extent are you within the linkages engaging with the whole issue of basically prioritization of access to domestic water within local or aquifer or basin level discussions about broader allocation issues? Because it seems to me we're at a very granular level, and I think it's great. And the examples you brought up were super, also of integration with greywater reuse and stuff. But to what extent does Watershed want to engage with these bigger issues of over-abstraction through agriculture, for example, that often happen and leads to lack of water for domestic?
Well, from my understanding of our work and our scope and what everybody has been involved in, I think we want to get involved when it comes to awareness of the issue, and our role in it as users of the water. In terms of actually having an influence on allocations, that goes beyond much of what we're doing, and I don't think we should try to do that unless we talk about, for example, in Kenya with a forum like that. At some stage, if they are well organized, they can flag this issue to government in a way that grabs their attention. But they cannot really influence it because there are larger issues at stake. So that is the level that I would think we would be working at.
Yeah, good.
Hello, I'm Jacob Baraza.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi. So I just got interested in the discussions around greywater, and more so with regards to the use of greywater in rural areas, taking into consideration that there is also quite some amount that will be from households and could be useful. Is it possible that we can also look at it from that perspective? That is one. And then two, just an addition on what Paul had already mentioned with regards to the use of Waterzella, where we work in Kajiado County. I believe there is a great opportunity, more so since we've been working on matters budget credibility. And one thing that we realize is that the citizens, they lack information to inform decision making, especially that which regards to planning and financing WASH and IWRM at the county levels. Thank you.
All right. Well, on the greywater reuse issue, I'd be very happy to expound on that further. We could even organize a separate webinar on that if there's a lot of interest, because there are a lot of experiences both within Watershed, but also other projects that we could share, because it does give an additional angle to the whole IWRM WASH linkage issue. And it goes in many different directions. So that's on the grey water. But if we have some time at the end of this webinar, I'm also happy to expound on that then as well. To answer your second question, one of the issues that I also mentioned in my presentation, which is very important, is that we should not overthink the IWRM issue at the level that we are working. Citizens don't need detailed information on water quantity and quality and decision making on water resources for IWRM, because this is done by their representative governments in most cases, and hopefully in all cases. So to a certain extent, we have to leave water resources management to the professionals. It's about where it touches WASH that is interesting for us. So it's awareness, and it's also agreeing on how we can jointly address certain problems in terms of contamination, shortages of the water resource. So that's what I would like to mention in terms of your second question. I hope that helps. If not, please engage me and we can continue.
Okay, then maybe we can look at the question from Martin about ACFO, or how can we collect data and use it for advocacy on the WASH IWRM linkages, and maybe particular tools. Is there anybody from ACFO who would like to give some thoughts on that?
Yes, I can say something if Anita is not. Veerle here from ACFO. Yeah, it's a very good question. From my perspective, I think, for example, you could monitor water quality, and there's a lot of parameters that you can monitor. So it really depends on the area that you're working on or the type of pollution you may expect, which parameters need to be monitored. And in order to do that, there's probably more tools, but of course there's always AquaFlow and Caddisfly to do that. Yeah, you need some hardware and you need some software tool to make a survey for that. Yeah.
And to add on to that, the one thing that comes out of a lot of discussions when we're talking about IWRM WASH is the water quality, and we haven't really specifically gone into it. But if you look at just this flow, the component of the drinking water has to be the best quality water that is available within the environment, because that's the bit that has to be allocated and made available for human consumption. And if you want to talk about advocacy and data, using water quality data and the threats to it, or the difficulties and challenges with it, is really a very useful way, and it can be with Caddisfly or the various kits that are out there. Back over to Eliam.
Thank you, Arjen. Let me see, I'm just going to have a look at the chat box. I was just thinking, although also, is there anybody from Bangladesh online? Because in Bangladesh, you've introduced the concept of water security, and I'd like to maybe briefly discuss how that fits in this dialogue to make sure that we understand that. Is there anybody from Bangladesh who can briefly explain their work on water security so far?
Hi, this is Digvijay from Bangladesh.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I can talk a bit about that because the CSOs in Bangladesh under the Watershed program has recently introduced water security planning. They are actually being introduced in 2 districts. So what they are doing is like kind of developing a plan. First, they are looking at the water resources and how they are being used. And based on the available water resources, they are communicating with the local government institutes and water authorities and water utilities. Based on a combined discussion among these parties, the water security planning is being developed. But I mean, it is also trying to span its boundaries, not looking at very broad or ambitious things. It's more like looking at things, that are directly linked with WRM and WASH issues only. So it's more like preserving the water resources that are close to the communities, like ponds, canals, and rivers. And the water security planning is precisely looking at how the local government institutes within their reach can play a role to preserve these water resources for the communities. So that's how briefly they are actually carrying out this water security plan.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I think that links directly to our discussion, and in fact, the semantics here are a little bit just that. They're just semantics, but in fact, what you are doing is exactly what we're describing. So that's great. So that's very good. It also helps to understand how these things relate from the different countries.
Eliane, this is Patrick again. Sorry, man. Maybe just coming in on top of that and on your answer to my previous question. But I'm very useful to have this schematic up, because I think that I agree with almost everything you were saying about the potential for interventions of WASH actors into IWRM. The only thing that I'd maybe say about this diagram in particular is that it's very strongly focused on the assumption of surface water being the main resource, and that you have some sort of high-level basin agency to interact with a Minister of Public Works. I think a lot of the some of the cases we've heard and a lot of our experience is that the main source being used is groundwater, that it's poorly understood at best, and that you do have a lot of other levels of institutional responsibility engaged in that management. And I think that maybe just thinking through a little bit more what the different levels of engagement, be that for user groups, local governments, service providers, ministries of public works, up to basin agencies or aquifer managers. To me, that's the whole art of this stuff, which is some of what you were describing and some of what we're doing in Watershed. And I think we need to articulate well that it looks very different how you do this in a situation where everything's relying on surface water and there's a large formal irrigated sector and large pipe networks where you have people negotiating at a basin level, versus, say, a lot of South India, where you've got massively distributed and uncontrolled development of groundwater for irrigation competing with not particularly controlled domestic water supplies. Sorry, that was a long point, but it's just about the multiple levels and the multiple boundaries, institutional and physical, that you tend to have to negotiate, and that make all of this so context specific.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Patrick. The problem, of course, with these illustrations is always that you try to capture too much in one illustration. And I fully agree with you. There are a lot of specificities per location that make it a little bit different. Groundwater is always much more difficult to deal with because you can't see it. You don't know exactly how much is there, where it is, what the quality is until you've pumped it up, which is already presupposes quite an investment in many cases. So yes, I would like to maybe then emphasize to everybody, also on the basis of what Patrick said, that this is a generic scheme diagram. The application to your specific circumstances may be slightly different. There may not be latrines that cause pollution. There may not be surface water. And the way that it's managed, and also in Mali, for example, can be very different. Many of the water schemes in Mali are in areas that are very remote and very dry, and there's no real issue of contamination of the aquifer because of the small number of inhabitants and so on. But the amount of water and the quality of water for abstraction is relevant, and how it relates to other villages and other users in the area is. So again, it does come up in these different circumstances. So thank you very much, Patrick, for that contribution. I see. Sorry, Arjen, go ahead.
I was just going to call attention to the chat box where we have a question from Sarah about water quality, that we are looking at water quality in rivers, and we're not actually promoting people to drink from the rivers because of water quality. So that's a very valid point. as well as there was a remark from her side on the gender issue that Watershed, of course, is putting forward as the central theme as well. Sarah, do you want to say anything, or you want us to try and answer it? Sarah?
No, that was the main question, because I think we had also last week a meeting with PWG, and that was with PMNEL also. There was still a question on this, that how do we see it? And for me, I think if we are talking about quality of water, we have to be very specific whether we are talking about drinking water, quality of drinking water, of water in general, and then that's still, I think, something that I don't see it very clear coming from different work packages. So I was curious, how do you see it from your side? And what is that when we're talking about interlinkages of WASH and water resource management, where do we focus on that?
All right. Arjen, I will answer that if you don't mind. So, Sarah, thanks for your question. When we talk about water quality in the context of our work within Watershed, I think it's important to emphasize that we talk about the quality of the water suitable either for direct consumption or suitable for simple treatment processes and consumption. So in some cases, like in Bangladesh, you've got pond sand filters that are sufficient to take the surface water and to treat it through the simple process and to drink it. But the quality has to be of a certain standard. If it's contaminated with arsenic or other issues, then pond sand filters, for example, would not work. So the quality relates to the quality of the water, either as it is in the surface water or groundwater for direct consumption, or how it can be treated simply and with very standard processes for consumption at the rural level. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Sarah?
I think there's another point that on the decision side, that we have a lot of women who are involved in the water issues at community level, but we don't necessarily see them at government level, and particularly within the IWRM authorities. There is an underrepresentation of women, which is one of the difficulties, of course, for gender empowerment. Okay, we've got just a few more minutes. If anybody has any burning question or issue, please put it in the chat now or start talking. Just to make sure that there's space still to take it up.
So I'm just looking at the chat box. There's a dialogue ongoing about the groundwater versus surface water, and the manual that I presented earlier. I'll just very quickly clarify. The manual does address both sources, both groundwater and surface water. So that's, but again, the manual is a manual that is fairly generic. It can be adapted very specifically if required. So that's quickly to Maria was asking that question in the chat box. Maria, do you want to add anything to that?
Hi, did you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Hear you very well.
Oh, hi everybody. Thanks. No, I was just thinking that it, you know, kind of, if you see the schematic in the presentation, the way we are all looking at it, it's true that it's really focused on the it looks like what is really surface water and not groundwater. So I think we can think about how to bring this point into the manual, or at least to have the discussion around it. But we can think about it later. I think it's an important point.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
There is a question about sharing all the information. Of course, it will be within the Watershed works, so within the standard Dropbox. So we will be putting it in the RSR, the information, and we'll make the webinar available as well to the people that are interested. You will be able to share it if somebody else has missed it. I'm also requesting if you can give a little bit of feedback on the link that's just been put in the chat box, to see how we can build on from this and take it further. And then I would like to ask Arjen to do some closing remarks and say what's going to happen from here. Back over to you, Arjen.
Thank you very much. Yes, closing remarks. Well, not to be very formal in this regard, we have the position paper and the manual, which will be shared with everybody. I would like to emphasize that the manual is a simple manual for field level workers. It is not a lengthy document with detailed descriptions. It is really meant as a tool within the lobby and advocacy work at local level to explain and to support the lobby and advocacy worker on how to explain these linkages between IWRM and WASH. And the position paper is a position paper, as I described in my presentation, based on our previous work and experiences, but we're very happy with comments and suggestions. But at some stage, it has to be considered to be a position paper in the sense that this is how we view these issues and this is how we work with them. So please bear that in mind when looking at this. And otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Both Arjen and I are available for any questions or issues that you may have at any time after the webinar and in the coming days, weeks, and months, as long as we're still working. And I'd like to thank Lilian for her presentation and Arjen for supporting this as well. Is there any urgent issue that I still need to address before we close? Speak now or hold your breath forever. Arjen, I think we're ready to close.
Okay, thank you all very much. And please have a good day and good luck with all the changes that are ongoing in the world around us. Thank you all very much and have a great day.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.